Certo. Please take place because although we are rather late, we would like to start. I would like to know if Luca is connected, Luca Bergamaschi.
Yes. Hi, Maria Grazia.
Hi. Hi, Luca. Okay, yes. Just to be already ready because here we are a little bit late. So welcome to this group that is dealing with climate, energy, and environmental justice. As you know, we have been talking about this subject already quite a lot, not only in the plenary yesterday morning, but also in other parallel sessions and even and also to this morning in the session on finance. And I would like to say a few words, but then I will leave the floor to Luca. I'm moderating this session. I started with the G7 and G8 a long time ago. I think I don't remember when, but Clinton was the president of the U.S., so it's a long time. And I must say that some progress have been done. But unfortunately, the problem is that the progress are very, very slow. And I've been, we have been having a lot of press releases talking about baby step, small step, and these steps were not enough at all, as you can understand. Now we are on the verge of two very important COPs, the one on biodiversity first, and then the one on climate. These COPs have to pave the way to the urgency Claudio was talking about. Because for politicians, a urgency is something very difficult to deal. The problem is that it's their job. If we needed somebody to do simple things, we wouldn't need a big capacity, a big politicians. That's the difference between a leader and somebody who is there just by chance. So that's what we think. But I have to say that in Turin, in the ministerial, we saw some steps. I cannot say that they are baby steps, but they are not enough at all, because we need to phase out fossil fuels and to especially to abate the emissions as soon as possible. That's what the science is telling us. So you see some empty seats because the three officials that were coordinating the working groups in Turin, in the ministerial, had other engagements. So I asked to Luca Bergamaschi, that is the founder and one of the two directors of ECHO, that is not new anymore, but it's a think tank on climate in Italy. To summarize, but also to have an overview to the Leaders Summit. I met Luca it was not the first time, but Luca was an expert on working for the Italian government on the G7 in Taormina. And so he's an outsider, but also an insider. So I will use this double face by Luca. Please, Luca.
Thank you very much, Maria Grazia, and I'm really sorry I can't be there in Rome with you. But thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to reflect about the outcome of Turin and what we would like to see then towards the Leader Summit. So for us, Turin was a very important moment, 4 months after COP28, to see if and how the G7 really are serious about implementing the global stocktake, and also how the G7 want to support all countries implementing it. So this is for us the things that we were looking for. What we found is there are good signals in the text that the G7 wants to take it seriously, in particularly domestic level. So there is a good level of intent. And actually, I think that should also show the power of the outcome of COP28 and the power of international commitments that countries then need to translate at domestic level. However, there is, of course, many contradictions. And as Maria Grazia said, progress on actions at domestic level is rather slow. So we need to see more commitment on actions. I will just go through maybe the energy, climate, and finance outcomes and what could be strengthened for the Leader Summit. So first of all, on energy, the headline news was the G7 agreed to phase out coal by 2035. However, there is a loophole. There is also some space for adopting other timelines in line with 1.5. So there is a real lack of clarity whether 2035 is a real date or not a real date. And so what we would like to see from leaders is to clarify and to avoid this ambiguity about the date, and really, at the very least, fix 2035 at the coal phase-out date for all G7 countries. This will have, of course, in particular impact on Japan, the US, and Germany, who are those countries that are most impacted by it. But again, it would be very important to see that progress. We saw some new commitment on batteries, so 1,500 gigawatts by 2030 as an aspiration target globally. But again, what we didn't really see is progress on the power sector. And we know, the power sector is the easiest sector, is where the technology are there, is where it needs really to move first compared to other sector. And we didn't really see much progress on defining and strengthening the 2035 commitment to decarbonize. And in particular, we didn't see any mention of phasing out gas in the power sector, which we know it's the first step and the easy step the country can and should take on gas. Also on gas, this is probably the more difficult and contradictory signal that was sent. So there is still support for public investment in gas, although in particular in Europe, we are getting out of the crisis. So there is still a perception from government that we're still in the crisis, but actually when we look at the security of supply, when we look at prices, when we look at the LNG supply, we really see that we are getting really out of it. So actually, as the IEA shows, there is probably too much supply and contracted capacity for LNG in the next few years. And so I think we need to really avoid public support, and it would be great if leaders really avoid that language. And finally, on energy, we haven't seen any new progress on addressing domestic production of oil and gas. We know that some countries like France have joined the BOGA, the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, that really commit country to phase out domestic oil and gas production by 2050 or earlier. But we haven't seen the same level of commitment in the G7. Quickly on climate, so we saw a good commitment on the NDCs to present new NDCs between 9 and 12 months before COP30. This is a very important signal because we need the first movers, and G7 should be the first movers. And we really would like to see the leaders reaffirm this timeline because we're not quite sure whether a country will actually respect that timeline, given how difficult it is to present NDCs, in particular from Europe. But we would like to see a clear commitment by G7 leader that at the latest by the G20 summit, which will happen during COP29 in Brazil, that G7 leader present their NDCs. That will be 12 months before COP23. There will be a very, very strong signal. And on climate, also on climate finance, we saw for the first time a language on the NCQG, which is the new climate finance goal that will be discussed and hopefully agreed at COP29. And again, there was quite a good language, but we need to see a more support for public investment for grants. And again, in particular, it would be great if leaders recognize that this moment at the end of the year is really important to agree to a new climate goal. Is not enough the climate minister. We actually need both leaders and finance minister to recognize this as a very important political moment. Finally, on other issues around finance, we saw some progress on phasing out fossil fuels by 2025. So the deadline is very close. And G7 committed to promote a coherent definition of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, but also to show progress next year on how they're getting there. The problem is that we don't see any actions, and we really would like to see action in the budget laws of G7 country. And for example, so in Italy, we always discuss the budget law at the end of the year, and we really would like to see a real discussion on cutting fossil fuel subsidies where it is it's easier to do so. And we reckon that there is 5 or 6 million that Italy could cut. And finally, maybe my last word is on international financial reforms. The G7 climate minister recognized the important role of MDBs and of debt reform, but this is really not their responsibility in a sense, because we really need to see the G7 finance minister. And I want to remind everybody that next week, the G7 finance minister will meet in the north of Italy. And we really need to see them more action on climate, in particular in tripling the loans for especially for mitigation from MDBs. To review the rule of debt. We know, for example, many African countries are really struggling to access liquidity because of the debt crisis. And so we need to change the rules, and G7 need to change the rules, including the IMF, on how to address that. And finally, we really need to see a commitment to increase the IDA fund. And we know that in December, there is the replenishment of IDA, which is the most concessional fund of the World Bank. We really need to see an increase by at least 20–30% on this fund to provide, again, liquidity, in particular to African countries for sustainable development goals. Sorry, Maria-Grazia, that was probably a bit too long, but hopefully this is helpful for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. You were perfect. Very, very good in synthesize a very long paper. So and so now I would like to ask to Annabella Rosenberg to come in because I think that just transition is one of the elements that is very important at the moment. And it's taking all the range of the issues, not only one issue. I think that also, well, I probably we didn't think enough about it, but also biodiversity side is very involved in the just transition. So if Annabella come in.
Thank you, Maria-Grazia, and thank you, everyone, for your indulgence, for having me again, in this panel. I think you're right. And it was really good to have the presentation just before going into the other aspects of what can be improved in the declaration, because I will spend most of my time flagging what is a massive gap in the G7 approach compared, I would say, to G20 even, which is the absence of just transition. And when we're saying just transition, I can see big eyes and others like saying, of course, but probably we are not thinking about the same thing when we are saying just transition. So I think it's maybe one step back about the concept itself, because it came from movements, and it came from the labor movement. Originally in the 70s in the US, flagging it, as an approach, as an alternative to the jobs versus environment narrative. This idea that we had to choose, and in the case for workers, it was choosing between their health and protecting the environment. And this was used by companies to blackmail workers and saying, well, you see, the EPA recently created at the time is going to destroy your job, so you have to sit with us, employers, even if your health is at risk. From there, the concept traveled a lot, and it was embraced by international labor movement, and of course now by many other social and justice movements, and even by governments now. But in that process of broadening, I think we might be missing a bit of its justice spirit, and people just use it as a qualifier of the transition. When I think it's really important that we stay connected to that justice element, because it means, on the one side, maintaining this fight for workers and communities that are impacted by change, to give them the support they need, the voice they need to redefine what future looks like. In general, there is also a quite patronizing stand, even among people working on climate or working on other policy issues. We tend to think that we know better than communities what they can do, but they have a lot of ideas on what diversification of the territories look like, what new avenues for jobs could look like. So we need to give them the space. But I think over time, what has come more and more clear is that there is no just transition possible, in particular in countries that are very dependent on fossil or on other commodities that are damaging the environment. This also applies, we can think to forest, and this is why also the conversation on biodiversity is so important, and any other ecosystem that is today a danger because of commodity expansion. We need to figure out what is the pathway for those countries to that economic diversification. And what we were saying yesterday is that today, the options for most emerging and developing countries is to remain in extractivism. What we are being offered is transition minerals, is, something else. Like any other way to keep extracting on resources, keep addressing water, that is today still available in many of our countries, to be like the next wave of extractivism. So when we're thinking about just transition as a key connector between the conversations at the G7, because if we cannot secure a just transition in the wealthiest economies for the working class and communities, in the US, in France, in Germany, how can we imagine a just transition being possible in Gabon? So they should also ensure that their communities and workers are getting justice, but then they have also a responsibility in supporting and reforming the systems to allow the rest of the world to go ahead with the diversification. And this connects to the G20 approach, where just transition is also being discussed. The idea from the presidency up to now is to work more on the principles. I think like our indication is like, it's good to talk about principles, but principles are a little bit all over the place. And maybe what we need is to start landing metrics. We need to start figuring out what are the commitments. Is it zero job loss, 100% social protection for all the communities, or an investment commitment to territories that are impacted? So we need to figure out those metrics as we have for finance, as we have for emission reductions. And this connects, of course, with the COP. And I will probably end there. COP 29 has a duty, to finalize the work we started last year with the Just Transition Work Program, where I think we had the right scope, But now all the governance of that work program is still in limbo. And in particular, when it comes to the voices of all those impacted, we are still excluded from that discussion. And there is a resistance to talk about resource mobilization for just transition. And I think the COP has a role in clarifying this year what is about just transition finance that is different from mitigation, from adaptation, from loss and damage. What is that falls through the cracks if we don't capture just transition? And that can help us build what we expect is going to be a central piece of COP30 in Brazil, because we do see just transition as one of the key outcomes of COP30, as one of those places where there can be a concrete outcome, putting justice at the center of climate action for once, and getting COP30 to have that like energy in. But for that, we need a lot of building blocks, and that starts with G7, that is not recognizing anything in its current text. We have a little bit more progress being made. I mean, thanks also to the C20 mobilization with the G20. But then, yeah, COP29 and COP30 ahead, with BRICS in the middle, that we've been signaled could also be interested to bring just transition to the table. I don't know exactly with which framework. Yeah, so I will stop there. But just to say that just transition is going to be with us for the past year and a half, for the next year and a half. And so looking forward to working with you all and also in this space to make it happen and make it meaningful for communities on the ground.
Thank you, Annabella. While you were speaking, an idea came to my mind because, of course, I think that the just transition measures the real ability, the real capacity of the governments. So it's an index of governance. If you don't have governance, you don't have just a transition. And the other thing that came to my mind is also that we need to enlarge just a transition, the concept, because at the moment just transition is only about workers, only because it's a big issue. But I think that the just transition is also give access to transition to everybody. And that's a big, big issue, because it means that it is socially equal, socially just, and that's a big issue. Anyway, we cannot go deeper, as you can understand. And now I would like to go to biodiversity. So we imagined a sort of dialogue, Nairobi to Rome, because I don't know if you know, but at the moment the subsidiaries, SBIs, of the CBD, the Biodiversity Convention are taking place. In fact, Bernadette has planned to be in Nairobi for more than 20 days. And we would like to connect to Bernadette and ask her, how do you think, how things are going in Nairobi? And what do you expect from the G7 to help the negotiations there? Hi, Bernadette. Bernadette is from WWF. She's the head of governance. I'm not introducing anybody. As you know, I'm a peculiar moderator. But Bernadette she's Austrian, although she seems to be British. She's Austrian. Bernadette.
I'm not sure if I seem to be British, but that's an interesting introduction. Thank you very much, Maria Grazia. And Habari Gani from Nairobi. So like Maria Grazia said, my name is Bernadette Hooper, and I lead on global advocacy for WWF International. And I'm right here in the UN headquarters in Nairobi. So some of you might recognize the corridors behind me, because there are the preparatory negotiations for the CBD COP16, which is taking place in October this year in Colombia. It's a really great pleasure sorry, a really great pleasure to be connected with you in Rome and to tell you a bit more about the priorities for nature and for biodiversity. And also very glad that my colleague Christiana is with you in person. So in case we get disconnected, she can just take over seamlessly. So the COP16 this year in October in Colombia is going to be the first biodiversity COP since the Global Biodiversity Framework to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 was agreed. This Global Biodiversity Framework, or the Biodiversity Plan, as we call it now for communication purposes, is actually quite a big deal for the world, and that is for different reasons. Firstly, the Biodiversity Plan is an important thing for people. As you probably all know, we have lost around 2/3 of our species population globally in the last 40 years, and the loss of precious ecosystems through floods and droughts and wildfires and other things continues to increase. But everybody, everywhere, is depending on healthy ecosystems and their services. So nature is our life support system. Secondly, the biodiversity plan is also important for climate change action, which we heard a lot about just now. Climate change and biodiversity loss really are the twin challenges, and they really need to be tackled together in an integrated way. And the IPCC was very clear that the Paris Agreement will not be achieved unless the biodiversity plan is also implemented. Thirdly, the biodiversity plan is also very important for human health. After the COVID-19 crisis, there have been many studies made, and they found that maintaining ecosystem integrity, conserving protected areas, and implementing policies that limit unsustainable exploitation of areas with high biodiversity play a fundamental role in buffering against outbreaks of new diseases. And I don't think anybody wants to see a replay of what happened in 2020. And lastly, but definitely not leastly, implementing the biodiversity plan is also important for the global economy. Intact biomes of nature and wildlife in the global south stabilize climate and secure rainfall and reduce storms in the global north. So implementing the biodiversity plan will create high economic returns and will help avoid massive future costs associated with the common existential threats of biodiversity loss and climate change, alongside with social stability and geopolitical security, which is also quite a nice side effect, I would say. So the COP16 in Colombia in October will be a very good moment to test if countries are actually ready to live up to their commitments to implement the biodiversity plan. The governments are supposed to submit their updated national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So that's the MBSAPs. You can think of it as the biodiversity plan. They are supposed to submit them by COP16. That's a massive opportunity for countries, and especially for leading economies, to show leadership. However, so far only Japan and France among these members have submitted their MBSAPs. But there is another, and I think even more important reason why I am telling you so much about the biodiversity plan and about COP16 when you're actually there to talk about them in Rome. So the reason is, like with most all things, the success and downfall of this biodiversity plan will depend on resource mobilization. Implementation can only happen if all the efforts are well resourced. And that's where the G7 as the largest economies come in. Nobody is better positioned to mobilize funds and encourage others to contribute. And the most imminent resource mobilization commitment, so the urgency, like Maria Grazia said at the beginning, for G7 leaders is that governments have committed to leverage at least 20 billion per year by 2025, so by next year, from developed to developed countries annually. And that would mean that by next year, they would have to roughly double the status quo of ODA, will mostly come from ODA. But I want to also make very clear that a boost at leaders level will make all the difference here, because we saw in the predecessor framework for the biodiversity plan, the Aichi targets, the reason why not a single Aichi target was achieved is not because the targets weren't any good. They were actually quite decent, in fact. The reason why they failed was because there was not enough high-level political interest and consequently not enough resources for implementation. And that needs to change for the biodiversity planet. It needs to change now. So the urgency I cannot emphasize enough. Because leaders have only 6 years left to reverse the loss of nature and implement the plan. But they have only 1 year left to fulfill the most imminent promise of 20 billion annually by 2025. And talking about US dollars, by the way, as you might have guessed. So making this happen is an important way for G7 leaders also to show that they're taking saving our future seriously. There is already a reference to this 20 billion commitment in the environment minister statement that Luca has earlier reported on. But we all know in order to expedite things and to make them really happen, it needs to come from the leaders. At the end of the day, investing in nature isn't charity. Investing in nature will provide economic benefits, and it's key to global economic stability, as well as essential to global goals on climate and public health. So it is necessary to sustain a livable planet. It's not just some philanthropic enterprise that they're asking for. We have, together with Campaign for Nature and some other organizations, launched a campaign to deliver this 20 billion annually by 2025. And I am now very glad to hand over to my colleague, Christiana, who is with you in person, and she can talk you through the details of what we want to see there.
Yes, there is somebody taking care of me. Now I would like to give the floor to Cristiana Delia, and she will introduce herself because it's quite complicated, but she's campaigning for having resources for nature.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria Grazia, for inviting me, and thank you, Bernadette, for the nice context setting. So yeah, my introduction is quite long. I'm acting as an independent advisor for the European Climate Foundation and behind-the-scenes network within the foundation, where we share intel and we work together towards a global moment such as the COPs that Bernadette has mentioned. And today I'm also representing the efforts that Bernadette mentioned, as I'm collaborating with a cohort of civil society groups, including WWF, Campaign for Nature, BirdLife, Avaz, and others, to advocate, as Bernadette mentioned, for the inclusion of nature finance targets in this G7. So just to reiterate what Bernadette said, there's something really important here. So in 2022, the parties, governments have made a historic finance promise. So the rich countries, developed countries made a historic promise to increase and unlock financial resources for biodiversity to support developing countries and indigenous communities on the ground to protect and restore these ecosystems that, as you know, are crucial for the global south, because populations, communities, indigenous communities rely on these ecosystems for clean air, clean water, food security, and as you mentioned, Annabella, on just transition, and it is all connected. Biodiversity is connected to climate action, is connected to just transition. So it is a historic promise, and there is a fast approaching deadline, which is 2025. So governments promised to unlock $20 billion by 2025 and $30 billion by 2030. This is public finance, and it is extremely important as we approach COP16, as we approach COP29, that the G7 keeps momentum around the importance of this historic agreement and reiterates, again, a commitment already taken. So we're asking G7 leaders to reiterate, to reconfirm, to recommit to what's been agreed in Montreal in 2022. So the deadline, as I said, is fast approaching, and we are getting a little bit anxious about it. That's why all different civil society organizations are joining efforts on this, because we need to make sure that leaders at G7 can demonstrate the world that they are serious about delivering these finance targets. We've talked to Global South countries. They've actually signed up an open letter, former presidents of Liberia, Uganda, Ethiopia, Colombia, and many more have asked G7 leaders to be really clear about their intention to deliver their finance targets on nature. Just like Luca did for climate, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what was agreed at the latest environmental communique released on the 30th of April. We are, as Maria Grazia, as you said, some slow steps in progress. The leaders have recalled the commitment in full, so to increase finance to $20 billion by 2025. But in their actual commitments, they only mentioning the deadline, not the numbers. So they're saying we will urgently accelerate our efforts, increase resources, etc. by 2025. You will think, okay, not a big deal if a number is not mentioned, but actually the climate finance numbers are there. Why are the nature finance numbers not there? It is extremely important that leaders will recognize this. Another unfortunate lack of ambition was the fact that strangely enough, the environment communique didn't mention the commitment to protect 30% of our planet by 2030, which is obviously crucial, and no recognition of the contributions of indigenous communities on the ground. Just to be clear, indigenous communities have also asked G7 leaders to include these numbers in their communique. So this is really an exercise of trust building at international level. Developing countries really want to be clear, really want to know that governments at the G7 are going to deliver against their promises. But it's also, we are in a climate justice working group right now. It's also a matter of supporting the Global South, making that transition towards a nature positive economy. They cannot sustain the costs alone of transitioning towards a nature positive economy and society. And as it's been mentioned, investing in biodiversity will prevent the worst impacts of climate change. So it does have an element of climate mitigation and climate adaptation as well. So looking forward, Finance Ministerial is coming up, as Luca just mentioned. It is really important that finance ministers embed nature in their communiques. We usually think of nature as separate from climate. I like personal opinion here, just to be clear, I like to see biodiversity being mainstreamed across all sectors, biodiversity as part of climate action. Heads of state have previously said that the biodiversity crisis is as important as the climate crisis. And this is why we're expecting finance ministers to make their numbers clear and the deadlines clear in a finance ministerial as much as they are for climate finance. And obviously the G7 Leaders Summit, it is the ultimate opportunity for G7 countries. So these are the richest countries in the world to actually commit to deliver their promises. Again, the Global South is watching, the Global South is waiting. And so we hope this is going to be an opportunity for the G7 to do the right thing.
Thank you, Cristiana. You know that in everybody there is a child. My child side would like to use this. And if you please keep to the time, otherwise I will have the right to do it. So anyway, I would like to give the floor to our friends from Baku. I think that, well, from Azerbaijan, not I don't know if you are from Baku itself, but of course, you know that there is a lot of curiosity in what Baku could address, because it's a sort of a middle COP in the middle of two milestones, quite important because of the architecture of the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, we think that Baku should be central, should be key in also pursuing what we already got in Dubai. So I would ask to our friends, forgive me for your surnames, Parvana Valieva and Gushan, I don't, okay, to tell us what they think they can deliver in the COP in Azerbaijan. They are also part of the organizing committee, so they have an official role also in the organizing committee of COP29.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I'm Parvana Valieva, Executive Director of Support to Health NGO and also co-founder of Environmental Protection First NGO Coalition in Azerbaijan. And since February, I'm COP29 organizing committee member. Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, will host the next UN Climate Change Conference, COP29. It's the first time in the region in November, and the year 2024 was declared as the year Solidarity for the Green World in Azerbaijan. Unlike other countries, host countries, Azerbaijan have less time for preparations. For example, for Dubai, they had 2 years, but we had only 10 months for the preparations. But anyway, we are doing our best to organize the event successfully. It is an enormous opportunity to bring together heads of states, governments, civil society, academia, international institutions to come together to Baku to join their efforts in tackling climate action, climate change crisis, to accelerate the implementation of Paris Agreement and to focus on long-term climate strategies and goals. To plan the event successfully, Azerbaijan president released a decree to establish COP29 organizational committee where represented ministries, agencies, civil society, women and gender foundations, think tanks, private sector, and here representation of 44% women also demonstrate active role of women in climate actions. Azerbaijan COP prioritize some issues, bringing together global North and global South, acting as a bridge between developed and developing nations, listening to all parties to achieve the formation of a position that will meet the interest of all stakeholders, focusing on global climate priorities with new targets and new initiatives. Ensure inclusiveness to ensure sustainable COP, gradually transition from fossil fuel to a green economy as a fossil fuel country and promote it. Transporting the problems of endangered small island countries to the global level and supporting these small island countries. COP and peace is one of the priorities of this COP. As you know, during Olympic Games, all war conflicts in the world are stopped, and Azerbaijan initiates such kind of initiative to stop all conflicts in the world during the COP, during 2 weeks. And the peace started for Azerbaijan from COP28, where Armenia also voted to Azerbaijan to be host of COP29, withdrawing its candidacy during voting process. It is important for everyone to join the efforts in climate action. It can be also bridged to confidence building to peace building measures. And peace is fundamental to effectively coping with environmental challenges, fostering environmental cooperation and dialogue. By addressing the challenges together with Armenian CSOs, we can create a more resilient and sustainable world for future generations. Today's climate change is deeply colonial. It has been largely caused by temperature zones in northern part of the world and has deeply deeply felt in tropics and Arctic zones by vulnerable communities, vulnerable countries. So it is clear that we cannot decolonize without decarbonization, and we cannot decarbonize without decolonization. There is an injustice on the ground of the climate action. Climate change is fundamentally about human rights. Climate justice is putting people at the heart of the solution. The burdens and benefits of climate change should be shared fairly. Farmers in Africa describe the erratic nature of their harvest, where they failed on the droughts. Hurricanes in Latin America and Asia destroyed homes and hospitals. These communities are least responsible for the emissions, but suffer the most from the climate change. Civil society plays a pivotal role in climate action in international climate change negotiation processes, serving as a catalyst for change, driving grassroots movements, and hold the world leaders accountable for their actions. As civil society organizations, our role in COP29 organizing committee to be a voice of civil society organizations, to deliver communities' messages to the decision makers, to negotiators, in order to ensure achieving inclusive decisions at the table. So meaningful engagement of civil society, comprehensive multilateral dialogue among states, communities, major groups, and other stakeholders, as well as UN agencies, is a key to take us to successful COP. G7. Okay. G7 can be constructive and support mobilizing more climate funds. G7 countries can demonstrate strong leadership and reaffirm their commitments to addressing climate change by setting ambitious targets for emission reductions, renewable energy adoption, and other climate-related initiatives. Long-term planning. G7 countries engage in long-term planning and policy development to ensure a smooth transition to low-carbon economy, as well as technology sharing and financial support can be supported by G7 countries. Finance mobilization for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage will be essential to our efforts. In conclusion, I would like to finish my speech with a slogan of COP29, in solidarity for a green world, and we would like to invite all stakeholders to Baku for COP29. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Yusha.
Dear summit participants, thank you very much for sharing time to my speech. My name is Gulshan Akhundova. I am chairwoman of Women Development Future Public Union, Baku, Azerbaijan. Also, I am member of COP29 Organizing Committee of Azerbaijan. As you know, Azerbaijan is developing country. Azerbaijan is oil country, but Azerbaijan do a lot of things on renewable energy, on moving to green energy situation. Now, I would like to talk about some concerns on climate COP29. Countries face several challenges in achieving successful outcomes of multilateral negotiations at COP29, including countries may have different views and priorities on climate change, to disagreements and difficulties in reaching consensus. Economic concerns, such as the impact of climate policies on industries and jobs, can hinder the ability of countries to make bold commitment and investment in climate actions. Ensuring global cooperation and alignment among countries is critical for achieving successful outcomes at COP29. However, this can be challenging due to differences in national interest and priorities. Engaging the general public and raising awareness about the importance of climate action is essential for driving meaningful change. However, this can be challenging due to the complexity of climate issue and the need for sustained public engagement. The transition to renewable energy and phasing out fossil fuels poses challenges in terms of infrastructure investment and policy coherence. Countries must navigate these challenges challenges to accelerate the shift towards clean energy source. Securing adequate climate finance to support developing countries in their climate mitigation and adaptation efforts as a key challenge. Countries must ensure sufficient funding and resource for climate action initiatives. Also, geopolitical uncertainty. Geopolitical tensions and conflicts can impact the ability of countries to cooperate on climate change, making it challenging to achieve successful outcomes of COP29. Economic and security challenges, such as raising interest rates and global economic uncertainty, can divert attention away from climate action, making it challenging to achieve successful outcomes at COP29. Shortly, I would like to say about climate justice. Climate justice needs to everywhere, like climate justice in migration, in social life, in health, and etc. I think we will talk a lot about this in COP29. Azerbaijan is a multicultural republic, and we are living in peace, and inviting everybody to come to participate in COP29. With your participation, we believe that we will make our COP29 in higher level. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course, now we are willing to know Azerbaijan better after your speeches, and we look forward to have real and good results. Now, a lot of people spoke about finance. Finance for climate, finance for biodiversity. In our working group, we had an exchange with Claudio because we wanted to quantify the next targets, and Claudio was saying, please, let's speak also how they spend the money. And how they give the money, because that's also important. And so I would like to ask Claudio to talk about it, but Claudio is an economist, and he's part of the C7 and the C20. He is from Brazil, so he's very connected to the next C20 meetings. And I would like also to tell to people that they will be asked to give a very, very short intervention. And when I'm also willing to use this, so 1 minute small interventions. And we are also collecting questions by on the Zoom platform. Okay. Claudio.
Thank you very much, Maria Grazia. Thank you very much for the C7 for the invitation to be on this panel. I hope I don't bore you being here like right after, just like Annabella said. And the big question is how the G7 and the G20 can actually collaborate and foster a successful outcome for both COP16 in Colombia, which is about biodiversity, and COP29 in Azerbaijan, which is about climate change. And as a matter of fact, we will be watching, because you talk about inclusivity in Azerbaijan, and during the COPs, I have never seen so many COPs against civil society. Okay, so that's something. So take the COPs away and let the civil society in the COP building, because it's been quite rough over the years. Anyway, but I'm going to talk first about biodiversity, because people talk quite a bit about climate, and biodiversity actually was the first sign that something was going wrong. The loss of biodiversity. Actually, it's been quite a while, and actually in the middle of the 20th century, scientists and people said, oh, we're losing biodiversity too fast. There's something really striking here, and we need to take a look at it. In 1972 in Copenhagen, they realized that actually climate was a big culprit of that process, and what was going on with climate was about industrial production and our living standards, pretty much. But when we talk about our living standards, we also have to talk about some ideologies that permeates some of our living standards and actually stop any change in that process. So it actually creates a feedback loop of disasters just growing. I'm going to quote somebody that's quite controversial because of his background, but philosophically he's not that controversial, but it's Martin Heidegger in a text called The Question Concerning Technology. He said, humanity is in big trouble when we start looking at a tree and already imagining a table. So it's like technology is not going to save us. Actually, it can create quite a bit of problems right there. And to segue into, you know, what happened in Germany, that we're not going to talk about here, but I'm going to talk a little bit about eugenics in food systems, right? Because what do we have? We have monocultures. We have this idea that developing agriculture efficiency has to do with limited amount of seeds, limited amount of pesticides and you know, fertilizers, all chemically based, and that process of actually developing efficiency in agriculture is one of the main culprits of the disappearance of biodiversity in the rural zones. As a matter of fact, for instance, in Chapada Diamantina, I'm from Brazil, I'm from Bahia in Brazil, and we have this beautiful place called Chapada Diamantina, and it's called Diamantina because of diamonds used to exist there. But there was something quite interesting that happened in the past 20 years was the disappearance of the native bees. So the bees were just disappearing, and all this, there was only pretty much one bee that was taking over the whole process. So there was a big loss in biodiversity right there. And I talk about Chapada Diamantina because it's one of the key places for bird watchers, for instance. And bird watchers actually started complaining about the migration process of birds because of the loss of biodiversity in that region. So that was already a big sign of that. So the failure of multilateral efforts in the face of disaster, it's very rampant. Like, we know that. We have a situation where the funds are not enough, neither timely. And as I spoke in the last panel, it's not a question of crisis or emergency anymore. Now it's a question of urgency. What happened last week in Brazil, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, I don't know if you've seen the floods, it's pretty much 80% of the state has been flooded. Of course, there's also a political part of that. There's also the ideological part of that, because as Annabella put it quite well, there's this whole idea of putting jobs and putting development in one side and putting nature in the other side. And this is something that goes on for the longest time, and actually it's still going on. In Brazil right now, there are a few bills in Congress that actually wants to expand the possibility of people that own land in the Amazon to be able to cut down 50% of the forest in their land. Right now in Brazil, you are legally authorized to cut up to 20%. They want to already alter it to 50%. In the Amazon, there's already been completely, you know, and it's creating a major crisis on biodiversity, because especially in the Amazon situation is we don't even know what kind of a biodiversity loss we lost, because there was not enough information about this aspect. So this ideological domination creates a lot of problems, and it creates a lot of problems on the financing side of things, right? So it says, oh yeah, we can subsidize fossil fuel, we can subsidize, you know, development of, for instance, cryptocurrency, as I spoke in the last panel. There's part of it is subsidized, since energy for businesses are subsidized in many countries, and these businesses are using a lot of energy. That energy is being subsidized to create a speculative market. And that's kind of an interesting feedback loop that creates, that constructs a situation that is very hard to pinch and to actually burst the bubble. So what can the G7 and what could the G20 do? Express their sovereignty, in a sense. I talked about tax before, and it's about resource mobilization, but it's not only about resource mobilization, it's about resource allocation. As an ambassador from Zambia spoke a few years ago at the UN, and that kind of struck me a bit, is we need to stop the leakages. Imagine if you're in a boat and there's a lot of holes in the boat and a lot of water going in, and then somebody comes with a lot of little cups like this to take the water out of the boat. The leakages are the size of a bucket. and they come with a cup. So the situation is not only about bringing the finance, but it's also about stopping the finance that goes to investing in the destructive parts. Yeah. And people talk about indigenous population. First time I went to the Amazon in 1996, I realized something with tears in my eyes, actually. It was that we are destroying the only people that know how to operate a nature-based economics. And that's very true, because we're always thinking about the next steps, like we Western-minded, people of excessive productivity tend to just destroy to construct, and no harmony whatsoever into that. So how can we actually produce a different type of food system, a different type of agriculture that does not destroy things? It's very complex, but at the same time, it needs quite a bit of political courage to stop the leakages that are going on right now. So we cannot have an agriculture completely dependent on chemical pesticides. We have to change that. We have to invest in agroecology. We have to invest in small family producers. They produce the food we eat. It's not the big corporations that are producing the soy and the corn, for instance, in Brazil, in Mexico, and other places, that are going to actually part of the value chain of ultra-processed foods that actually creates more problems than feed the population. Because ultra-processed food is being linked to 12 types of cancers, and it's being linked to excessive obesity, and now a major surge in diabetes type 2 in all populations, particularly in small island development states that have no agriculture, import a lot of ultra-processed foods, and create that problem. So to conclude, in a sense, so I don't take much time of that aspect, what we need is the political courage. What we need in COP16 and in COP29 is governments that are actually willing, actually more than willing, they are committed to accelerate the process of transition and of just transition, paying attention to the populations that are most vulnerable. And this is not just a civil society, little thing, oh yeah, the most vulnerable population, but those are the populations that are actually working to bring food to our table in many ways, like the women in Africa, like the women in small family agriculture in Brazil and Latin America overall. So what we need to value that aspect. We need to value more natural processes. We need to value natural food compared to ultra-processed foods. So we need a complete overhaul of our value system, of our ethical system. Because if we think that it's okay to eat trash that can produce a lot of diseases and negative personal externalities, it's an ethical problem right there. And to conclude, I'd just like to bring this aspect that's quite interesting in oncology. In oncology, I'm not a doctor, but I have a good friend who's an oncologist, and he said the interesting thing about cancer creation is the lack of diversity. When you isolate a cell, cancer comes in. When you have diversity of cells, then cancer cannot come in. So the question is about diversity, biodiversity, and the question is about survival. And survival for humans and animals and pretty much life on this planet depends a lot on what we're going to do on financing the climate transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really like your way of connecting things. And I would like to ask to people if they have they wanted to say something or to make a question or whatever. I know that somebody yesterday said, "Oh yes, I want," but now they are not moving. So please, please let us know. Patricia.
Thank you, Maria Grazia, and congratulations to this panel and for all the insightful approaches on climate. I wanted to comment and ask about, well, as you know, I work on financing issues, and we see more often lately that not because that a financing initiative has a color like green or blue is necessarily good from every angle and every sense. So what are your views on this? Like, for instance, debt swaps for nature or blue bonds. To what extent these are kind of false solutions and they are not really, not only covering the gap in terms of climate finance, but also in terms of being really good for nature in under a justice climate and economic approach. And my other question is about your perspectives or expectations about the next new quantified climate goal that is under discussion. Of course, it needs to be really ambitious and higher than the last 100 billion US dollars per year, but it also needs to be very specific about the sources of financing to achieve this quantified goal. If you have any perspectives about that, thank you.
I would take another couple of intervention and then, okay, so we have
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this panel. My question is regarding the aspect of the due diligence towards human rights, but especially in this case also climate change and so environmental rights, we can say. It is that, by the way, it is human rights. We know it's the environmental rights. So it is at European level today, they approved, reconfirmed the approval of a law directive for due diligence, compulsory that the companies, large companies, has to respect, but of course was watered a lot during the process. And so one of this watering was regarding the absence or exclusion of financial sector by the necessity to invest and to control the due diligence towards the downstream and the investment. So then my question is that why we do not put at the table of the discussion also a compulsory due diligence for the companies worldwide. We know that there is a UN process on this that is lasting more than 10 years, but so it's not into the agenda at G7 or G20, and we need to consider this aspect. Probably the environment is more, I mean, can accept more because Europe is going towards this directive, but so it doesn't seem to be into the table of discussion. So my question is, what do you think and how could rise this topic? Thank you.
you, just another one and then after.
Okay, hello. Actually, we haven't treated this theme a lot, but this conference talks about climate and environment. So I just wanted to ask a question about what do you think about nations in particular like China and India that are experiencing a period of growth, enormous development, unthinkable for them. And they are polluting now since they haven't done it for many years, since they weren't growing as much as the other big powers did. So of course they are unwilling to stop, to limit their production today, since they haven't done it for many years in the past. So what would be a solution to cope their growth in economy as the other superpowers did since now, but in a more healthy way, in more ethical way? Thank you.
I think that for the first question by Patricia, I would like Bernadette, but also Annabella to answer. I don't know if Bernadette is still with us. Bernadette?
I am. Can you still hear me? Hello, hello? I
Yeah.
am still with you. I hope you're with me. Excellent. So Patricia's question was about blue bonds and subsidies for nature and things like that, whether that's a false solution, and also about the NQCG, the new goal, the new quantified climate goal, sorry. With regards to these many innovative sources of finance, which is often looked at because we all know there's only so much money going around. I think it's definitely prudent to be very careful and look at the details, because the devil always lies in the details. And there are some that are working well and are really good and beneficial overall. But there is also a lot of there's a lot of room to bring in some elements of greenwashing, for example, and that's definitely not helpful. What we promote very strongly is the mitigation hierarchy that you're all definitely very familiar with. So for us, or anything that is to do with offsets is only the last resort once all the other options of mitigation and avoidance have been fully used. So I also wanted to quickly touch on the NQCG, the new quantified climate goal, because I think that is a much more interesting and promising place to look for biodiversity finance as well. It is being pulled together at the moment, and we all know that there is finance that can be both beneficial for nature and for climate action. There's also climate action that is not beneficial for nature, and I think that's the part that we want to avoid. Long time ago, there was discussion about maybe allocating about 30% to nature, but I'm not sure that has happened so much. Back then, it was more 3% than 30%, so there's definitely room for improvement. But that's a thought that I would like to leave you in the room, that there are many places that are better to look for this money than necessarily some dodgy innovative finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. On the new quantified financial target, I would like also Luca to come in. But before, if Annabelle can answer to the first part of the Patricia's question.
It's a tough one, because I think in the climate space, we still have quite some homework to do. And be humble sometimes on some of these issues, because I think we are now quite clear that some of the solutions that have been put forward by governments are not so. Some people coming from the justice space have said so. So I will not necessarily own all the mistakes of the climate movement, but when it comes to the excessive use of offsets, when it comes now to when we are thinking about the debt swaps for nature, same thing for climate, I think like one of the things that we know is that governments that are under pressure to deliver on commitments, including ones that have the right objectives, because we have seen this with Colombia. We are seeing governments that are trying to go in the right direction, end up signing for anything that will give us at least the hope that they will get resources. And so giving also legitimacy to tools that might not be the most adequate ones. But I think we also need to be mindful as a movement, as CSOs, what is the needs that they are expressing and why the right policy solutions have not been put in place. And that's why proper debt mechanisms need to be prioritized. But yet again, this is not my space of expertise. Just to say that we are reading the research, Patricia, that is showing that those debt swaps are not materializing in actual impacts and protection of nature. So we need to take stock of what academia and experts are saying and act accordingly and be very mindful, yet again, on how public resources are used. The NQCG, the new climate finance goal, it's one of those conversations where this is going to happen. And I think like for the Climate Action Network, this is indeed one of the key expectations from Baku. I mean, this is where we do see the COP in Azerbaijan helping us at least move one step forward on three things: on the quantity, And as we said, the spectrum is massive, and we are doing some work, Climate Action Network and Climate Justice Allies and the Gender Constituency, to align a little bit our dogs in that spectrum, because it goes from the 300 trillion that Jason Hickel has spoken about in terms of the climate debt that is owned to developing countries, to the 100 billion. That is where we are. And I think like in between that, there is the importance of the quantity, but it's almost as important that the number is, where is that number supposed to be coming from? Because for us, the fight on public financing and grants is as important as the ultimate number, because otherwise we can find ourselves in a similar situation that with the 100 billion, which was mobilizing 100 billion. But in the end, there were loans, there was private money was supposed to be leveraged, and that never happened. So public. And the last one is allocation. And I absolutely agree with Claudio on the NCQG. It's also about money for what? And it needs to be clearly established in that process. Where are these resources supposed to be going in the mitigation, adaptation, and just transition, and loss and damage, etc.
Yeah. Luca, still with us?
Yes, but I have to leave you now, Maria Grazia.
I
Just
see.
on NCQG, as you ask, the main things I would say is that we need to find an agreement without delay. So we hear some concerning also positions that there might not be enough time, or it might be too difficult, but that can be shift a decision, in particular because the following year we have the conversation about NDCs, and so the two things are connected in a way that we need to see financial commitments and an agreement there in order to provide the confidence to our country to increase their ambitions in their national plans, because of course the finance element is a very, very important enabling condition for new NDCs for every country. But first of all, we need to find an agreement on the NDC, on the NCQG, and really focusing on the needs, the real needs, is very, very important. And we want to see, again, a stronger focus on public finance than we've seen so far. We know, everyone knows that we need private finance as well, but public finance should have the priority in terms of how to use it, how to target it, and how to mobilize it. I'll stop here, and thank you so much for having me for this great discussion.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much. And now about the due diligence, I think that Claudio is the right person to answer.
Thank you, Maria Grazia, and thank you for the question regarding due diligence and the binding agreement on corporations and business and human rights. It's still being discussed, and we don't come to a conclusion on that. And what is the problem with due diligence is the fact that countries, governments tend to protect their own companies. So sometimes their own company, let's say, I'm going to talk about my government, let's say that a Brazilian company is a transnational company like Vale, for instance, and it's doing a certain business in Mozambique. The Brazilian government is going to try to protect Vale instead of actually doing due diligence and actually agreeing with Mozambique that actually some of the practices would have to be better scrutinized. So the problem there is exactly political and political asymmetry. And to resolve that political asymmetry, we need binding agreement, and we need the courage, like the political courage and the political responsibility that is being asked from these governments. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudio. Of course, now there is the question about China and India. It's a question that we have been asked so many times. I don't know if you would like to answer, but I can, as a moderator, I don't know if I can answer, but I can answer, I think. But anyway, I will do later on. Please go ahead.
Yes, related to China and India, they are the most polluters in the world. And G77 plus China, the negotiations with these countries are going through. And I think China is resistance to new NCQG. Also USA, it is very not challenging to negotiate with them to in terms of increasing climate finance. They are mostly support the idea that climate finance should be donor-based. Some philanthropists should donate to climate finance, but it should be there should be any public financing mechanism. There will be a definite finance mechanism that it can be percentage of GNI or GDP of the developed countries. USA supports the idea that the already collected funds should be spent on technologies, resources, capacity buildings, and other things. But we also keep in mind that the funds, Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and Loss and Damage Fund provide funding to the countries with credit-based. According to OECD assessment, 70% of climate finance are provided to the countries, not on grant-based mechanisms, but on credit-based with loans. And the Summit of the Future this year will take place in USA, United Nations headquarters, that will involve heads of states. And the main issue here will be discussed, the reforms in international financing institutions, architecture, and we think that multilateral banks should the reforms should be applied to their administration of international financial institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, I think that I've been listening to people saying, but what about China? What about India? A lot of time. And I don't think it was what you meant, of course. But just in general, I think that everybody should think first to their own responsibility. So it is a common effort, but everybody had to have to take their own responsibility. In this, what the court of the Netherlands did, saying that what the Dutch government was doing was not enough, is a pillar, because they said this is your duty to do the most you can, and even more than the most you can. So blaming each other is not going anywhere. On the Paris Agreement is less compulsory in many ways, but what it stated was, and that was the big news, that everybody had to contribute. But there is a principle that is very important, that is the common but differentiated responsibilities according to their capability. And this is also the news about the Paris Agreement. So if the capacity, the ability of dealing with the climate change and the efforts is increasing, that's also more the responsibility that is increasing. That's how I see it. I don't know if Annabella was pushing you
Not to add, but just one reference that I wanted to share with you, because I think we are all very opinionated on this, and I have additional views. But what I would like to offer is that civil society, like CAN and climate justice groups and gender and trade unions have been building over the past years since Paris a common civil society equity review of each country commitments. And these are all available in our website. It's called equityreview.org. And there you can also make your own mind about how ambitious is the contribution from China, from India, based on clear indicators. And that might surprise you that actually what they are putting on the table is comparably more ambitious than what we are seeing from G7 countries. So, but you can judge it yourself. You can even choose which indicators you want to choose to weight equity within a 1.5 ambition, which is, of course, what no one is respecting. But I would just want to invite you also to read it a bit more there, because I think that is also quite enlightening.
And anybody else? Unfortunately, we lost the person that was, because probably she thought I was not going to give the floor, but that was not my intention. I wanted just to have, because these 3 questions were very heavy already, so I didn't. And I don't know if somebody wants, yeah.
Thank you, Maria Grazia, and thank you all for this very fruitful conversation on all the things we learned. Thanks to you today. My only 2 points are those ones. The first one is that it is a very urgent issue, but fortunately we have the solutions. So the only thing we have to do is to keep pushing and asking for political responsibility. As Annabella was saying yesterday, it's not a matter of political will, it's a matter of political responsibility, so that the solutions could be implemented in the fastest way possible, especially in the energy sector and regarding the food production systems. And the second point I would like to make, and it's the last one, is that a question I do to myself first is that the awareness is already enough. Because I was looking at the news today, we are having floods in Milan today, which is in the northern part of Italy, some extreme events, some extreme weather events as usual, and probably some more than 30 degrees will be in the southern region in the next few days. As far as I could see from the news on my mobile, no one is talking about climate for this episode. So maybe we still have to concentrate on how to raise awareness, because otherwise people would not understand that what is happening now in Milan and in any other part of the town, of the world, sorry, is due to climate change, and it's due to greenhouse gas emissions, and it's due to fossil fuels and to deforestation. This chain, which is so familiar for us, I wonder if it is familiar enough for anybody else. And connected to this is, we talk today of committed governments, but maybe we should focus a bit more and reflect a bit more on what is the pillar for committed governments. And as far as I can understand, the pillar for committed governments are committed citizens. So if we don't engage our best efforts in increasing active citizenship, in fostering global citizenship, and increasing citizens' action on climate change based on awareness and based on the certainties that the solutions are there, we're not going to solve this problem. This is my contribution I can make today, the reflection I would like to share with you all. And I do have hope. I'm sure we can win this thing. I'm sure we're gonna win this thing, but maybe we can allow ourselves to take a few steps back, if necessary, and look again at the basis of engagement. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, thank you very, very much for your contribution. And now, just to end up, well, we are already, just one sentence to one leader that you are asking. So it's valid for everybody. And so you have to address only one leader, one G7 leader. I mean, not one leader in the world, but a G7 leader. And just a phrase. Let's start with Bernadette, that is far away, and then Bernadette.
Hello, hi everybody again. I'm not sure if I can pick a leader. I would like to tell to all leaders that they need to live up to their commitments that they made on the biodiversity plan, and starting with the 20 billion annually that they're supposed to deliver by next year. Thank you.
So Bernadette already didn't made a change, but please, one leader, address one leader, because I will address also the Italian leader. So since I'm the only Italian, and so please.
It's a really difficult one. I think my demand would be try to bring something new to the table and at least support this billionaire tax. And I think even if this is not like the direct climate demand, it feels like it's an idea for which the moment has come, and they can do something about it. So my demand would be to these three. So I'm not saying all, to these three governments that are not to be named, but might include the presidency, that, that they make a real step so that G20 can also go ahead and then this to the UN, where it belongs, to make it happen.
Thank you, Annabella. Claudio?
I'm going to use an old proverb, which would be to the leader of Germany, actually. Put the money where the words are.
That's very good. Parvana?
I'm addressing to USA leader to build, to engage in diplomatic efforts to build consensus among all parties involved in COP29. Thank you.
I believe that somebody from here also will participate there. And I hope that they will remember COP29 Azerbaijan, which will be making most, most important decisions.
And I'll address to the Italian government, to the Italian presidency. Of course, we hope that you will get big results, showing your leadership that you always mention. And the other thing I'm asking to the Italian government is put the money for climate, for fighting climate. Okay, thank you very much.